think it's important to know as a real estate broker what those guidelines are for appraisers also when we're doing market evaluations, right? Because, I mean, I have a strategy in which I do market evaluations, which is not the same as an appraisal. Like what I do for people, or people call them a comparable market analysis. I call it a market evaluation. When I'm doing one of those, I'm looking at, well, I'll go into that. So there's a couple ways I go about it. So one, I'm trying to find 3 to 5 comparable properties, as you would, that an appraiser may potentially use to compare as value. But I'm also trying to find what a buyer would pay for that house. And I do that by looking at comps, as people would say. But I also look at what's currently on the market, what they're competing against. I look at houses that aren't comps, that are like, if I get, like, say I take a house and I find 3 comps and it comes out for 400 as the value is what my evaluation says. But I also look and see what other properties are listed for that aren't comparable, but they're also listed for 400,000. Like, how do those compare? Because a buyer's not necessarily looking at like this specific type of house. They're not looking 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot on 0.25 of an acre. They may be looking at, oh, well, we would do something on an acre or 2 acres, or we may do 4 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms. They're more shopping price. So I kind of look and kind of gauge all of those things. Like, what are you competing with in that price range? How can we fit that in? What take into consideration in that regard also? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so, but it's not just about comparables, because if it was like that, then I think that you're leaving a lot of meat on the bone and on the marketing and real estate side of it. If that.
Mm-hmm. And we'll kind of do the same thing at times when there's a house, excuse me, that's obviously overpriced, and I'm just going to throw 800,000 out there, and we may throw an active in there that's also priced at 800,000 that is far superior to what we're appraising, just to show that here's why. I mean, your next door neighbor's been on the market for 90 days, and it's a far superior house at the same price. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
The difficulty is everybody thinks their property is far superior.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's the hard part, is how do you quantify that? Well, I have mountain views. Cool.
We live in Grants Pass. Everybody has mountain views.
Everybody has mountain views.
Right.
That's great. Thank you. Right?
I put that in my marketing remarks sometimes. I'm like, yeah, if you look like these other houses.
Yep.
Just don't take the picture out of the bedroom window leaning out the edge.
No shot.
Or with the drone.
I don't take pictures. Sorry.
Those are the ones that really get us. It's like, they've got a view of the river? No, their drone had a view of the river.
Right. That's funny.
Living in an airplane or what? Well,
Daniel, to kind of dissect where you were going with that, I think you're seeing it from the consumer's point of view, which is fantastic. Like, okay, what is this person looking at a $400,000 price point? How does it match up? How does it do all of that? Mm-hmm. Where in the appraiser side of it, they're literally telling the bank whether or not that value for that specific property has comparables that give it the value it needs to for the loan. So
yeah,
it's just looking at it from 2 separate angles.
It's a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, to my own credit, there have maybe been 2 or 3 houses in my career that I've had appraisal trouble with. My own listings, like maybe 2 or 3, and probably 2 of those were seller assisted prices, as some people would say. Like, very rarely have I had trouble. I've had more trouble on the buyer side, like going into it. And that's probably just my approach on the buyer side also. It's like, I had a client of mine ask me the other day, what do you think of the value of this home? Like, I'd be glad to do a market evaluation on it, but you're asking me at the front door. I have no idea.
Right.
Like,
we get that all the time too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one, I haven't done the research.
Exactly.
But 2, like, my opinion in this house, like, I would never buy that house.
Right.
Like, I think it sucks.
Right.
Like, to be frank, I'm not going to say that, I might, if you're watching, I might say that. It depends on who you are. But I mean, my opinion of the house has no bearing on how you feel about the house.
Right.
Like, and it shouldn't, because you're buying the house and you,
to value.
And it shouldn't. It absolutely shouldn't. It's just, I may not like how that house is laid out. I may feel differently about it. And so that's why I think it's really important when you're looking at data to really just be super subjective about it and to try not to have any feelings about the house. Like, there's a house that I sold last year that I went into the house and I'm like, there is nobody in God's green earth that's going to buy this house. I literally had a client call me the next day and be like, I saw this house. It's amazing. And then she bought it.
Your face.
She bought the house. She loved it. She absolutely loved it. But when I was in the house, I was like, there's nobody on the face of the planet that's going to buy this house. And my own client bought it. But I mean, that's just, and I'll keep my mouth shut the whole time on who that actually, on what that house actually is and how I feel about it,
right.
But I mean, I'll try to look at the data and be like, okay, this is what the data shows. This is what the square footage is, bedrooms, bathrooms. Okay. Are there comps that are out there that could support this? Okay. I could see that working. Like, let's give it a rip.
You are in the minority. I'll just tell you that right now. The fact that you go through and do all of that before the client sees or like puts in an offer or anything like that, I'll ask them, did your real estate agent pull the comps for you so we know that we're making, because they're concerned about value? And the answer is no, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, some buyers think that the CMA that the agents do is the appraisal, which that is a very difficult conversation. My agent already gave me the value, right? That's very hard for that conversation to happen. But a lot of people are going in blind and relying on the listing agent that they did their due diligence to come up with that value. And that is a very big struggle in our world.
Yeah.
Well, we'll call a realtor, we'll call the listing agent or the buyer's agent and say, especially the buyer's agent. And I say, okay, I can't discuss value with you, but send me your comps that you pulled. Oh, I didn't pull any.
Send us a copy of your CMA.
Yeah.
And they didn't do it.
Right.
So how do you expect me to hit value if you haven't even done your own research to see if the value's there?
Yep.
Again, they were relying on the listing agent to have done what they needed to do. But it can be a seller-driven value, as you put
Exactly.
it.
Right.
So
Of course.
appropriately, which, what does a seller know? How much they want to get for the property.
Yeah, that's all they care about.
Right.
Especially in a seller's market. How many times were you seeing, well, this house just sold for $350. Well, I'm going to go $375. I'm next door and I'm identical, but we're increasing. So we're going to go to $375. And then the next one, let's go for $400.
Right.
That was 2020 and 2021.
Yeah.
Like in a nutshell. Like that's all
And
people.
06
yeah.
and 05, 06, 07.
Before my time, Deb.
Sorry.
Way to go. Stated
We're a
yourself.
little older.
Yeah. Well, it's the value thing is just so interesting because it's. I mean, you may feel differently, but I don't think you do. Like a true value, in my opinion, value of something is what a buyer's willing to buy it for and what a seller's willing to sell it for, what they can come to an agreement on, regardless of what you guys think. Or, I mean, you have to do it because of this guy and what they're doing. I get it. But I mean, that's really not, if somebody's willing to pay for that, I mean, technically they're not paying for it because they're borrowing the money from you, but you understand what I'm saying. So it's just, the value thing is it's a very interesting in how people go about it. What was that?
Sorry, it was my phone.
That's okay.
But I think you're 100% right in, if we just take a look at value and break it down itself, it's what somebody's willing to pay for it, right? Is the value. Our requirement is the backstop to make sure that we're not doing a bad investment. But a cash transaction.
Yeah, because you're paying for it.
Right.
And that's the part that buyers miss or sellers miss, is that the buyer isn't paying for it when they're getting a loan. He is. Well, not he is, but Nations is.
Right.
Like it's not, they're not, you're not using your own money. You're borrowing money from him,
And you got to remember, from an appraiser's perspective, we go off historical data.
Right.
We have to go off of closed sales. Yes, we put in actives and pendings, and yes, we look at what the current market is. Because again, if you're a $400,000 sale and there's 6 actives to pick from in the same neighborhood and they're all at $390, $395, 400 is probably a little too much.
Right.
So
especially if they haven't sold.
Yes. So we definitely watch that trend. But like today,
because they haven't sold is a very, like, the phrase, because a buyer isn't willing to pay that price for those properties, is probably why it hasn't sold.
Right.
And so that's why they don't use actives as comparables, is because a buyer has not been willing to pay that price. But if they paid that price, then you use that.
Sold.
Then you use that historical data as like, okay, the market will bear this price, right? So, sorry, interrupted you.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
So when we have an increasing market or a declining market, we make time adjustments, either positive or negative, depending on what market we're in. And we will have to make those adjustments, and usually the actives and pendings will support those adjustments. And that's how we determine off of that historical data, because we're using a comp that's 6 months old, or obviously 2 sales within 90 days typically, but to fill in that gap. Today, the house I did in Cape Junction pulled 17 comps. That's how we get started.
Wow.
So that's a lot of data.
Sorry, I'm getting buzzed here, but yeah. In 2021, the market changed so much in 6 months. Like, it was insane. And so for me as a listing agent, trying to market somebody's property, doing a market evaluation was so challenging. Trying to give people advice, like, okay, like, we could list it here. However, right, there's nothing on the market that's currently there, or that's currently comparable. And we know that there's a ton of buyers out here looking for a property like yours. Like, we can try and stretch this thing a little bit, but we always also have to be careful of the appraisal thing. And so it was always my approach. Like, I don't want 10 offers on a piece of property, 10 or 15 offers. I want 2 or 3 really quality ones, because 1, 2, 3 really quality offers, and that way the buyer's not stretched. But I also felt like if we got there, like we got 1 or multiple offers, I felt like that was really what the value was, as opposed to we had 10 offers. Right, 5 of them overbid it by $40,000 because they just wanted to win. They need a place to live. Right. Like, that's not really the value. They're just stretching themselves.
Right.
Like, I felt like if we got 1, 2, or 3 offers on it, that was like a really good value for that market.